I've been yelling about it for the past couple of weeks. The eviction moratorium expired yesterday. I showed you guys the data that showed where states that ended the eviction moratorium last summer saw a 50% increase in COVID cases. Now the federal eviction moratorium has ended as of yesterday. And we have the more contagious, more virulent Delta variant out there. Activists went up to Nancy Pelosi's house and served her an eviction notice.
Great. So we have an eviction notice for the speaker today. It says, "Dear Speaker Pelosi,
I think this happened yesterday.
Give an immediate notice that millions of Americans will face eviction tonight when the eviction moratorium expires.
Yes, some states did extend it.
Immediately call Congress to session to vote to extend the eviction moratorium and keep people."
And Congress has gone for 6 weeks.
Second worst COVID surge to date.
The House recessed for 6
To allow
weeks.
evictions to begin. Housing is a human right. Hashtag eviction moratorium. Hashtag eviction crisis. So we'll be serving this eviction notice to Nancy.
And we know for a fact this is going to cause cases to rise.
So we have an eviction notice.
But luckily we do have some representatives that are standing up for the common people. Representative Cori Bush sleeps outside of the Capitol to protest the end of the eviction freeze. I don't know if this is a video piece on it.
I wanted to explore their story.
Oh, fuck you and your ad. I can't imagine that they won't be called back into session. We are going to need legislation from the House to deal with the concurrent crises that we are facing in this country. COVID's not the only one.
Their rent could soon come home to an eviction notice with that federal ban expiring tonight. Members of Congress are demanding action that's not likely to come. Our Christina Ruffini has more from the White House. Good evening, Christina.
Good evening, Adriana. As you mentioned, House Democrats just didn't have the votes to extend that eviction moratorium, prompting one lawmaker to take her protest outside the Capitol.
What good are you then?
This is not okay. We cannot just allow humans, 7 million of them possibly, to over the next few weeks be sent out to the streets.
I didn't know Senator Warren was out there with them, so good on her.
Representative Cori Bush was joined by Senator Elizabeth Warren.
We've got 11 and a half hours for the CDC to step up and say we're going to extend the moratorium.
Our states and our localities need to push the money.
Now, the Biden administration were operating under the assumption of the Supreme Court ruling that they would strike down any eviction moratorium that wasn't passed by Congress. That was in the SCOTUS decision. My viewpoint on it was, go ahead and fucking do it. Let somebody challenge it in the courts. It's going to have to work its way through. At least look like you're doing something for the people.
Out there, money has to be released.
But the White House says a recent Supreme Court decision prevents the CDC from approving another extension. And House Democrats didn't have the votes.
The longer it takes to finish, the longer we'll be here.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the steps, Democratic and Republican senators are working to hammer out a bipartisan deal on infrastructure.
Fancy word for bridges, roads, transit system.
We'll talk about that tomorrow. I still think that's going to be torpedoed.
But
they might get the bipartisan bill passed.
The $1 trillion bill.
We are finalizing the last couple pieces of legislative language.
Lawmakers say they'll grind it out through the weekend and try to get something concrete before the August break.
They keep saying they've got a deal. I've been hearing this for weeks.
Har, har, har.
And then they don't have one again.
Now, even if the Senate can get that bill together and get it passed, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has said she won't bring it to the floor for a vote unless it's accompanied by a bigger Democratic budget bill. And it's not clear if Senate Democrats, who can't afford to lose a single defection, have the ability to get that done.
Yep, because Sinema and Manchin have both said that they will not support it. Now, Ilhan Omar was one of the lawmakers out in front of the steps. They didn't show her, but she was there with Cori Bush. She's also pushing for a new guaranteed income bill that would send $1,200 monthly to most Americans. Representative Ilhan Omar is set to introduce bold legislation on Friday that would create a guaranteed income program in the U.S. to send $1,200 a month directly to most Americans. The Support Act, co-sponsored by progressive lawmakers Reps Cori Bush, Pramila Jayapal, Dwight Evans, and Jamal Bowman, would first create a $2.5 billion grant program to fund local pilots in guaranteed income. These would run in hundreds of communities across the country from 2023 to 2027 and provide findings for a national program. The National Guaranteed Income Program would start in 2028, sending $1,200 per month to adults making up to $75,000 a year, or the heads of household making up to $112,000 per year, as well as providing $600 monthly per child. The payments would phase out for higher incomes. Importantly, undocumented people who file taxes with an ITIN number would be eligible. The legislation would also establish a banking system through the Postal Service for unbanked, underbanked, and individuals experiencing housing instability to receive payments. Fantastic. All of these things needed to happen. Poverty is a choice. For too long, we have prioritized endless growth while millions are homeless, hungry, or without health care, Omar said in a statement. We as a nation have the ability to make sure everyone has their basic needs like food, housing, and health care met. She is correct. And that is why they hate her. Also, a proposal to limit the work week to 32 hours. That's always been one of the things that I have been behind staunchly for over a decade now, is that we need to limit the work week. Anything you do to limit the labor pool drives up the cost of labor, and that is a good thing. U.S. lawmaker proposes groundbreaking legislation that would reduce work week to 32 hours. U.S. Congressman has proposed legislation that would reduce the standard work week under federal law to 32 hours instead of the current 40-hour work week. Rep. Mark Takano, a Democrat from California, introduced H.R. 4728 on Tuesday, and the bill was referred to the House Committee on Education and Labor. Legislation would amend the Fair Labor Standards Act, which establishes the federal minimum wage, overtime pay laws, and other work standards. Currently, non-exempt employees get overtime for hours worked over the typical 40-hour work week. Exactly. You do $1,200 a month, and almost the entirety of that money is going to be injected back into the economy, if not the entirety. The data is clear. Giving poor people money is a good thing. And it needs to be a multi-pronged approach. Just give people money, and also we need to invest in infrastructure, which creates jobs. Also last week, AOC totally dismantled the Texas voter suppression laws in a hearing where they had the representatives from the Texas State House that fled the state. What AOC had to say. I think this happened on Friday.
Like the Jim Crow that you grew up in and were born into.
Absolutely. Jim Crow 3.0.
This Occupy Democrats piece has this
now Representative Thompson
hip music under it.
In the era of Jim Crow, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Now, briefly, what were some of the voting limitations that you know of that targeted black voters during the Jim Crow era?
The black code was one of them because it denied African Americans the right to vote. And then after that came the poll tax. And the poll tax stayed, even after the law was ruled unconstitutional, remained until 1966 in Texas.
Now, Representative, and it's important to know that until 1966, we had apartheid in the racial apartheid, known as Jim Crow, in the United States of America. Now,
the remnants of which still exist.
As you noted, that includes a polling tax, correct?
Still permeate our society.
Laws, stringent voter ID laws back in that time, correct?
Yes.
Citizenship
yes.
checks, correct? Difficult hours to vote during Jim Crow, correct?
This is some of that CRT that the Republicans are so against.
Right.
And you had the normalization of white supremacist voters monitoring and
congratulations on the ex-wife
polling locations during the era of Jim Crow, correct?
That's correct.
Now, let's walk through some of the dangerous measures proposed by your Texas state Republican colleagues and supported by Governor Abbott that they're trying to enact today. So the proposed Texas bills, SB 1, HB 3, would set new ID requirements, so voters must provide their driver's license number, or if they don't have one, the last 4 digits of their Social Security or a signed affidavit, correct?
Right.
Now, they would also place a ban on the distribution of mail-in ballot applications, correct?
Correct.
As well as monthly citizenship checks. Monthly citizenship checks for voter registration, correct?
Correct.
They would also ban extended hours during early voting. Is that correct?
For those persons we call essential workers who helped us during the pandemic, yes.
And the proposed bills today, right now, will create an array of new criminal penalties and requirements for folks who assist voters at the polls or people who assist others planning to vote by mail. Is that correct?
That is correct.
These bills would then expand the authority of partisan poll.
You're exactly right. The GOP is 100% antagonistic to the idea of education. CRT is just a new boogeyman, a buzzword, something they can slap on a bumper sticker. Shit that they can say in a 2-minute hit on Fox News. People run with it. It's a catch-all phrase for anything dealing with racial issues.
Poll watchers by granting them quote-unquote what is known as free movement at a polling location, which could allow...
Because they're implicated, RB.
With no training coming in your area.
Representative Thompson, this sounds an awful lot like the Jim Crow that you grew up in and were born into. Based on your lived experience, would you say that these proposed voting laws are remnants of Jim Crow? I shouldn't even say remnants, revivals, an attempted revival at Jim Crow?
Absolutely. Jim Crow 3.0.
And would you agree that SB 1 and HB 3 are systematic measures to impede your community, black communities, Latino communities, and wide variety, including, as Representative Pressley had noted, disabled Americans, the constitutional right to vote, as was done in the past?
Yes.
Now, if I might happen to have some conservatives in the chat right now, I can tell you, if you're not against these, you're on the wrong side. How do I know? Because Willie Nelson is against these. Willie Nelson, Beto O'Rourke rally to support Texas Democrats in D.C. State Senator Brian Hughes stood at the center of a small group of conservatives rallying Saturday morning in front of the Texas Capitol. Microphone in hand, Hughes touted Senate Bill 1, the Republican-backed voting legislation he authored that Democrats found so odious that they broke quorum and left Texas last month to halt its passage. But the East Texas Republican and his conservative supporters were up against considerable star power Saturday. Willie fucking Nelson, former Democratic presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke, and the Poor People's Campaign, a national civil rights advocacy group, held a rally capping a 4-day voting rights march that began Wednesday in Georgetown. Never smoke weed. He is adorable. Not just adorable. Fucking. She is a powerful woman, and that is she's a strong, intelligent, takes no shit from nobody woman, and that is what I admire about her. That's what I look for in a woman. But the right get emasculated by women like that. I would assume not. Or maybe the Democrats are cutting them a deal. Tax thing was what, 30 fucking years ago. That's why I had to do all those Taco Bell commercials. Hughes and the Republican National Committee had scheduled their own gathering to counter Beto O'Rourke's sham voting rights march, the committee's news release said. The democratic process will eventually work out, Hughes told the American Statesman. Our Democratic friends will come back, we'll debate, we'll vote, and we'll pass Senate Bill 1. I can't tell you when, but that's going to happen. And once again, it's for a problem that doesn't exist. Voter fraud is virtually non-existent. Tell me it's not to try to limit the amount of people that can vote. O'Rourke's rally was, in part, a show of support for the 57 Democratic Texas House members who fled to Washington, D.C. to avoid Texas law enforcement and keep the quorum broken until the end of the special legislative session. Last month, House Republicans voted to authorize the use of arrest warrants, if necessary, to compel absent members to return to the chamber. On July 22nd, as O'Rourke gifted House Democrats $600,000 to continue their Washington stay, many House members asked the former El Paso congressman to use his network to hold rallies in Texas and build momentum against the voting legislation authored by Hughes and his GOP colleagues. A march organized by the Poor People's Campaign, who does amazing work. Look them up on social media. Follow their shit and donate to them if you can. The Poor People's Campaign. 4-day march organized by the Poor People's Campaign began Wednesday morning with a Georgetown to Round Rock leg, then picked up again Thursday with about a 10-mile walk into North Austin that was joined by the Reverend Jesse Jackson, the political activist and former Democratic presidential candidate. The final leg of the march brought the crowd to the Capitol on Saturday morning, where the Reverend William J. Barber led the group up to the stage where Nelson would play. I'm glad that they had these pre-made signs that say "in the filibuster," because that's one of the things standing in the way of passing the federal voting legislation that would prevent a lot of these state laws from doing damage. This is State Senator Brian Hughes. A savory looking individual. But hey, who am I to talk about looks, right? I'm sure people look at me and go like, that's not a savory individual.